part of managing yourself is being willing to ask ourselves this very important question that we don't like to ask ourselves, but it's this: what if I'm wrong? What if you see it differently? What if you have different information? What if there's a different perspective to this that I can't see right now?
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Unleashed, the fastest hour on the internet, where every episode I'm joined by a best-selling author or accomplished leader who shares common sense leadership ideas, all in the name of helping you make a greater impact. I'm your host, Jeff Tetz. Most leaders feel their business could perform better. At Results, we help leadership teams achieve their bold visions by providing a unique system of accountability and ongoing coaching to create more predictable and successful outcomes. Reach out for a conversation at unleashresults.com. So often, simple conversations can turn into heated disagreements, but there's a better way. You can actually get better at having tough conversations. And that's the topic of today's discussion with former hostage and crisis negotiator Scott Tillema. Scott has over 20 years of law enforcement experience with the Chicago Area Police Department, and he retired in 2023 at the rank of lieutenant. He was trained in negotiation by the FBI and has studied at the Harvard University Program on Negotiation at IMD Business School, and he continues to receive training from the world's top negotiators. Scott's a prolific trainer with the negotiation field, and he travels the country and all around the world speaking to a wide variety of audiences. He's taught negotiations at Harvard for the FBI, and he's keynoted for several companies such as Microsoft and Bosch. In 2016, he was invited to give a TEDx talk titled "The Secrets of Hostage Negotiators," which has received over 1 million views. His visibility as a speaker and an educator through TEDx and other venues has reached global status. Scott currently resides in the Chicago area and is a partner and co-founder with the Negotiations Collective. Scott, welcome to Unleashed.
Hey, Jeff, how are you? Great to be with you and your audience on Unleashed.
Hey, right on. And I'm doing great, thank you, and certainly excited to talk to you. And I thought it was so interesting that when you and I did a pre-call to get ready for this conversation, that one of my first comments to you was just how warm and friendly and agreeable you seemed. And you got a kick out of that because here you are, Leon, like an FBI trained negotiator. And I think I had all these preconceived notions. Tell me your thoughts on how often you get misconstrued for how people think you're going to show up versus how you actually show up.
Well, first of all, part of that is you're a warm, friendly guy as well. So it's easy to connect with somebody like you. So you get some credit for that as well. But I think that we all have stereotypes and preconceived ideas with people and situations and everything. And maybe we're not as aware of that as we could be. But even the concept of negotiation for people, a lot of people see it as it's me against you, and it's some kind of competition of who can win or who can get more. And maybe there are some elements to that, but I just see negotiation a bit differently. I see it that you and I have to work together to reach an agreement or get to an agreeable outcome. And just by reframing my definition, or perhaps your listener's definition of what is negotiation, now we're in a completely different headspace to say, I'm not fighting you. I'm not looking to destroy you or make you believe what I believe. It's not about me being right or my ego. It's about us reaching an agreement, and how are we going to get there? And for the people that are in the negotiation space that say, I'm going to come in hard and be rough and be intimidating and bully you around, guess what? I'm not going to like you. I'm not going to want to work with you, and I'm going to get out of there as quick as I can. So why not come in with a collaborative mindset? And whether it be business negotiation or crisis or hostage negotiation, I found that this has served me and our clients very well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I think I was thinking about all of the difficult circumstances that you have been in, and probably the difficult personalities you've dealt with. I think I was expecting some kind of a rugged exterior until we got into it. So now you had spent a lot of time as a SWAT team member with the Chicago Police Department, and then an FBI trained hostage negotiator. How does a person become selected as a hostage negotiator candidate in the first place?
So, first of all, if you want to be a SWAT hostage negotiator, a hostage negotiator of any type, you probably need to be in law enforcement. I would say probably 99% of the time, these are jobs filled by sworn law enforcement officers. I think a lot of people are very interested in doing this type of work, but they're not in law enforcement. And that's generally a prerequisite if you're going to be doing this. And now there are a couple exceptions that we can get into. But broadly, I started in law enforcement in 2002. I had some educational background, picked up some more education. And you need some experience doing this job because you are going to be negotiating, like you said, with some of these more difficult personalities. If you are surrounded by good people, which I think most of us are in a professional environment, it can be very shocking to know that there is an element of society that is very, very different than that, who probably has very, very different morals and social norms and culture. And it's not what a lot of people are used to. If you're living this good life to be selected to be a law enforcement officer, hey, you're going to get exposed to some things. So a lot of places require you to have certain age or certain time on the job. And when I was selected to be a negotiator, it was 2009. So I had 7 years, or I'm sorry, it's 2007. I owned only 5 years on the job. So I was pretty young in age and pretty young in my maturity in the field. But I think having that educational background helped me get selected to be a negotiator on this regional SWAT team.
And what did you find appealing about it? Like, I'm trying to think, like, was this a completely unexpected invitation, and interested in what your first sort of reactions and responses to the opportunity were?
So in 2005, I had seen in the Chicago area at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, they had a class titled Hostage Negotiations. Dr. Nancy Zars was the professor, and I was like, ooh, this looks really cool. And of course, they don't just let random people into the class. You got to be in the program. And they're like, oh, the program is forensic psychology, and it's a master's program. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Long story short, I went back to school for my degree in forensic psychology with a different university, never ended up taking that class. But maybe 10 years later, I was invited in by Dr. Zars to teach in that hostage negotiations class at the Chicago school, which was kind of a nice full circle moment for me. And I told all the students how jealous I was that I also wanted to take the class that they were in, and I never had the opportunity. I just ended up doing the career instead.
In the work that we do with leadership teams, I would say one of the fundamental challenges is they're not having real conversations with each other. There's very much an absence of trust in many organizations, on leadership teams. There's an absence of truth telling because we'd rather avoid those conversations than have them, or sometimes they blow up. But the other thing that strikes me is I know a lot of people that take training on crucial conversations and how to have difficult discussions with people, and it doesn't translate automatically. And I'm really curious, what was your deliberate practice, I suppose, as you were trying to get better at these skills? What did a day in the life look like for you when you were trying to develop and hone these sort of new expected skill sets and capabilities?
Sure. So it starts off with your initial training. So when I was selected to be a negotiator on this SWAT team, we were trained by FBI agents. And I remember the chief negotiator for the FBI, he had just retired, and now he's teaching this class with active FBI agents. And, it's a big eye opener to say, wow, these are heavy hitters. These are people who really know their stuff, and we're learning. So you have to go through some initial training to give you the knowledge and maybe start to develop that skill. But really, a lot of it is knowledge training. And for this type of work, you can't learn by watching the PowerPoint. A lot of it is doing and moving that knowledge to that skill base. But we learned in this FBI class the skills of listening. Like that is the one thing that just stands out to me above anything else that we did in this class. You learn to listen. And I remember thinking, cool, I'm going to be, this is the head of the FBI Chicago right up here. These are their top negotiators. Awesome. They're going to teach me the magic phrase I can say that I can tell to anybody to make them do whatever I want them to do. And, how disappointed was I when they're like, all right, it's Monday. We're going to learn the 8 skills of active listening. Because you're like, well, I'm an adult. I've had some good success professionally. I know how to listen. I know how to communicate. Let's just get to the good stuff. And it turns out that is the good stuff. Because on Tuesday, we're doing listening skills. On Wednesday, we're doing listening skills. We make it to Friday. At least we're going to do something. We're doing more listening exercises. Cool. And you learn to talk less and really bring people into that conversation. So now you have, after a week, a good, strong knowledge of some of the basic fundamentals. And I would say that the 8 skills of active listening is probably one of the fundamental pieces of crisis and hostage negotiation. But now, like you asked, how do you put that into practice? And we have sessions where we're doing back-to-back exercises where we're focusing on listening with somebody else, or we're doing group exercises and we're listening. Everybody wants to talk. They think we're smooth talkers. This is how you get people to do what you want them to do because you got this silver tongue, but really it's listening to people. And now that we have this, I can go every day in my work as a law enforcement officer, because at the time I was a uniform patrol officer. Shortly after that, in 2009, I made it as a detective. So I was interviewing people all day, every day. That's what you do in detective work largely. And these are the opportunities to really make it's not about me, it's about you. How do I draw that information out from them? How do I get them comfortable? How do I get them to share more than maybe they want to share or should be sharing with me? And that becomes kind of fun, because now I'm interested in you, but there's a purpose here. And as a negotiator, it's my goal is to get to a safe and peaceful outcome. How do I do that? And that's a serious challenge, particularly when you're dealing with people that are really upset and emotional. So every day we got to put this into practice. We're handling domestic calls for service. We're handling traffic crashes, just everyday calls where we're dealing with people who are emotional and upset and in states of crisis, that this just becomes normal. So when a normal person says, I have somebody who's really upset and they're waving a knife around, oh my gosh, this is my critical incident of my lifetime. Say, well, this is the 3rd or 4th person today I've talked to that's been in crisis. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, so they find like intentional, what I might call safer scenarios for you to hone those skills early on. Scott, was that fair?
I think that's probably how it should be. In the perfect world, our new negotiators. So now you finish your training, we're going to move you into the team. So when you're new, we should give you like those ground balls, those soft, easy calls to move in. But there's not a lot of soft, easy calls with the SWAT team. And I remember my first negotiation, it was maybe 6 months after I had graduated from this initial negotiation training. And I had gone to a number of calls with the team before my first negotiation. So I understood how it worked. And really, as a new guy, you're kind of in the background, right? But this call, it was Sunday. It was 5 a.m. I was one of 2 negotiators who were there. And guess what? You're there. You're a negotiator. You're getting the phone. And I remember my team lead, Patty, was there, and she was supportive. Hey, you got this one, go for it and make it happen. And that's the moment where, almost to better answer your question, where you're turning the corner, where in class, that there aren't significant consequences where you mess up. Maybe your colleagues laugh at you, or your friends make fun of you, or you get some healthy criticism from the instructors. But now when you do it for real, it becomes very clear that there are significant consequences tied to the outcome of these conversations.
Yeah, and good. I think great segue, Scott. And so thank you for sharing some of the actual experience and the background that you had when you were sort of first learning your way. I think that's fascinating. And so now you've made this career transition. You're doing a lot of public speaking. You're helping people navigate difficult conversations in all kinds of situations. And I wondered if you could kind of go through what turns maybe simple disagreements into heated discussions? What's going on for people, maybe chemically in their brains, as we get into these difficult, challenging discussions with people?
I think that I'll reserve the discussion on dopamine and serotonin and all this for a professional psychologist, psychiatrist who can speak clearly on the medical and what's going on in the brain. But my concern is we are having trouble having conversations with people who are different from us. We are having trouble hearing ideas that we don't believe in. We are not having real conversations. And every time I ask the question, hey, is it going to hurt you to hear an idea that's different from your own or different from what you believe? Everybody very clearly goes, no, it's not going to hurt me to hear that. But yet, what happens when we start to hear somebody who has a different position? And pick your topic. It could be politics or war or Supreme Court rulings or whatever the hot topic of the day is. It doesn't take long for somebody to start hearing this and then feel the need to jump in. And that's where being a trained listener is so awesome. And we spend so much time in the conflict resolution classes that we teach. We're doing exercises where you just have to listen. We're training people just to listen. And when you hear something that you don't like, your goal is to get more information out. And what we're teaching people is probably rule number one of negotiation: manage yourself first. And if I can't manage myself, how am I going to be able to connect with somebody? How am I going to influence somebody? How am I going to lead in this conversation to help us get to an agreement that we can both say, this is something, a place we want to go, if I'm not in control of myself? So it begins and ends with manage yourself first. Do you understand what are your triggers? What can be done or said that's going to throw you for a loop, that's going to activate that physiological response where you feel it in your belly and your heart and your hands and your face? In that conversation is the very wrong time to be figuring out what my triggers are. So we say, we're going to begin that right now here today. I want to know everything that can be done or said that's going to elicit a reaction, because the less surprise we have when we're managing ourselves, the stronger we're going to be. I don't want to be surprised in my reactions. I can tell you things you can tell me that are going to make me happy, things that are going to make me frustrated. And if we can understand ourselves, we're going to be in a much better position to be a powerful negotiator.
So how does a person with a high degree of confidence start to hone in on what their individual triggers might be?
I think that's pretty easy. Let's have a discussion of the last time you had these reactions. Maybe what we look for is maybe 3 different indicators of a negative reaction. And that's probably going to be blaming. Are you blaming somebody else? You're putting it on somebody else. Are you experiencing defensiveness, where you feel you need to justify and explain unnecessarily sometimes? Or do we have a loss of self-control? So I would want an exploration of three different areas. Tell me when you start blaming others. Tell me when you start to become defensive. Tell me when you have lost self-control. And let's get into what is happening in these moments and how can we prevent this from occurring in the first place. Just to understand that people need to know this is fairly normal reactions. A lot of this can be evolutionary psychology to say, hey, I feel a threat. And we probably have these reactions because the brain is wired for the negative. It's there to keep us alive. That the brain isn't existing to see the positive in life. It's designed to keep us alive. So I'm looking for threats. And we might have an instinctive reaction that no longer serves us. That maybe I see somebody critical of me on social media and I could have that fight or flight response or that amygdala hijack where we go to a very instinctive response and say, no. There's no threat to me here. I'm not in harm's way. I'm not going to be hurt or killed. So this reaction maybe that I'm experiencing with my body, I don't need to have that. So I'm having a bit of a conversation with myself. I'm managing that space between stimulus and response. Man's Search for Meaning is a great book. Really like that one, where they talk about there's a space here and that space is ours. And how many people say, well, I acted this way because Jeff was a meanie pants and he said this horrible thing, so I had to respond a certain way. You don't control me, I control me. And it's such a moment of freedom. It's such a moment of freedom for people when they learn and realize, hey, I get to control me. You don't get to control me. And just that right there, it can be a huge corner for people to turn.
Right. And so now, Scott, I've never heard the triggers classified into those three distinct categories before. So I think that is first of all, it's really interesting and it is really insightful. And what I'm doing right now is I'm going down that list of blaming, defensiveness, and loss of control. And I think like the one that I struggle with the most is defensiveness. And I wonder if maybe we could unpack that a little bit. So if there's anybody listening that's like me and defensiveness is sort of the trigger reaction that you most commonly experience, what's behind that? And then how do we start to silence that or harness that in a different way?
Sure. So understand what is going to trigger that. And I tell people, I want you to be a great listener. So let's have 12 different questions that you can ask people, because you can't solve the problem if you don't know what it is. And the first question that people come up with is why? I want to know why. Tell me why. Now that's good. I want you to know why. That's critical. But that one word, I think we should eliminate from our vocabulary. Because if I want to trigger defensiveness in you, I'm going to start my question with this. Hey, why did you do this thing? Or why didn't you do that? And for anybody out there who's not sure on this, I want you to remember this. Next time your boss calls you into his or her office and begins the conversation with that magic word, why, you're going to feel defensiveness and you're going to be like, whoa, I've practiced this. I know what's coming. I know what triggered it. It's this particular word. And I feel that I need to explain that it's attack on my identity, my work, or something about me. And there's a difference between maybe having an explanation and jumping in with a defensive, because it's going to be, your breathing's going to be different. Your tone's going to be different. The pressure of how you deliver it's going to be different. So not just in the content of what's being said, but the delivery of how it's being said, I think for me is the real indicator of defensiveness.
Okay. All right. So in that case, like if I'm hearing you right, that sounds more like if somebody asks me a why question, I'm going to get defensive. If
Potentially.
Right. And but I think like because I'm in a position of influence in my organization, right? And so there's conversations that I might feel like I'm in charge of scheduling a meeting, and I might be sharing an idea, and I might get defensive about people's responses. And to me, that feels different. Or am I confusing that situation for what you were saying?
No, I think in that particular situation, we're going to meet that with a pause, and we don't need to respond right away. We're going to consider the timing, because defensiveness is going to be observed when we're jumping in probably a little bit too early. We feel the need to move quickly. We hear that response from somebody else, and we can just simply say, thank you, tell me more, or help me understand the reasoning behind this. Because in negotiation, they talk about the difference between positions and interests. And so often we argue or we negotiate from positions, traditional positional negotiation. Your position is $2, mine is $5, and we have these positions. But what's behind that is the interest. And maybe that's the better question, to say, hey, you're hearing these things that you don't like, and you're starting to have that feeling. Help me understand more deeply what makes you say this, or where this thinking is coming from, or how we ended up here, because I'm going to start to assume reasons for why you're saying this, and it might be entirely wrong. And part of managing yourself is being willing to ask ourselves this very important question that we don't like to ask ourselves, but it's this: what if I'm wrong? What if you see it differently? What if you have different information? What if there's a different perspective to this that I can't see right now? And I've had negotiations that haven't ended well, that it might have served me very well if somebody had said to me, hey, Scott, what if you're wrong on this? What if this approach isn't right? Is there a different aspect or perspective that we don't see right now? And so many of us don't want to admit, and particularly in leadership roles, we don't want to admit we don't have the answer. We don't want to admit we might be wrong. We don't want to show weakness. And somehow we equate asking for people's input with some kind of weakness, that, well, I don't know the answer. Well, if Scott doesn't know, then we're in big trouble. How about this? I want to get to the best outcome possible. And I think that's a goal of a great negotiator, let us get to the very best outcome possible, because it's not about me, it's about the outcome. And as leaders and as negotiators, I tell people we have to get in the mindset that it's not about me, it's about we. I don't negotiate for me, I negotiate for we. And that right there, that one line can change everybody's perspective. Because some people say, hey, look, I'm kind of hesitant when I negotiate for myself. I have trouble negotiating for myself. I would argue you never negotiate for yourself. You're representing your company or your family. How happy would my family be if I could have 2 extra weeks of vacation this year? How much better off could my family be if I got a 7% raise next week? I don't negotiate for me, I negotiate for we.
Yeah, that's good. And I love the question, what if I'm wrong? Going into it like that. Now, there's a couple of things that I would love some input on from you here. And it's, and I think it all comes back to managing yourself in that moment, right? Because I think, I don't necessarily think there's a huge knowledge gap with navigating difficult conversations. Like, I think we can all get better at understanding some of the tools, and what active listening looks like, as an example. But I think, Scott, and I'd be curious your perspective on this, is one of the fundamental challenges is people don't know how to regulate themselves in like the first 30 seconds when something's not going according to plan. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't know if I want to generalize and say that it's always in the beginning, because some people are triggered right from the get-go, but it depends how it's structured. I think that I want to get comfortable with people first, so I'm going to create an environment where people are comfortable and we start to have the back and forth, so people are less likely to hold back. So I think we should be prepared that there's a negotiation tactic where I'm going to come in and be the competitor, and I'm going to try to poke at you a little bit and knock you off your game plan and maybe try to take control of the situation. But it could be a strategy where I come in a little bit more soft and reserved, and I get you comfortable where you think this isn't going to happen. And then maybe a little bit later, I'll try a technique that might poke you up a little bit. Now you're not expecting it. And are you as ready and prepared to manage yourself then?
Okay. How much, and I call it priming, and call it preparation, call it whatever you want, but I'm getting better at priming myself for conversations where I think there may be triggers lurking around the corner. If you were to assign a percentage to it, I mean, what percentage of navigating hard conversations more effectively has to do with preparation and priming?
I think everything is in your preparation. So much of what we do is in our preparation, because that allows you to have a strategy. It allows you to have a different plan. If you're really preparing properly, we're going to role play this. And when I do individual coaching with people, we role play their difficult conversations. And I will have one time where I'm really emotional, maybe sad, or really perhaps angry, or maybe no reaction at all. And they get through the first time, they're like, okay, I feel really good, let's run that again, because they are now thinking, well, he's going to start crying or being really upset. Now they have a whole different character in front of them. And after we do a couple rounds of this, say, how do you feel on this? And they have this confidence to say, not only have I thought this through or written down some questions or thought through the strategy, but having practiced this, I feel like I can handle this. And the feedback that I then get from the small amount of coaching that I do now is, it was so much easier than dealing with you. And I was like, what a nice compliment that is. Thank you.
So role playing, if you know you've got a difficult conversation coming up, role playing, really important. But something that just occurred to me, most of my background, I think, on crucial conversations has been deliberate preparation for an actual conversation. But I think what you're reminding me of now, or you're making me more aware of, is the role playing and the practice will help you deal with unplanned difficult conversations. And I never put that together. And it probably seems so obvious to you, but that's a light bulb for me, for sure, Scott.
When we just do it ourselves, you think you know where it's going to go. I'm going to say this, and then they should say this, and then I'm going to talk about this, and then they're going to do this. But you have no idea what I'm going to bring at you when I'm going to role play on this side. So that anxiety, that stress that you would have had going into that initial conversation, let's shake that out right now. to say, whatever is going to happen for real, it's not going to be any worse than me putting you through your paces to get comfortable. And then we're going to give that real-time coaching and feedback to say, all right, you've really given some real thought to your content of what you're going to say, but have you practiced your delivery? Specifically, I want you to be aware of the rate, the rhythm, the pressure, the volume, and the tone of what you say. So 5 different aspects that we can adjust on our delivery. And then once you're getting what you're saying and how you're saying it, now I'm going to work on the nonverbal pieces. Because imagine now we're just going to hit the mute button and people are still going to be watching me right now. What do they see? Do they see a smile? Do they see hand gestures? Do they feel like I'm into this? Or am I sitting here talking to you like this? All of a sudden, it's a different feel. We're having the same conversation, but I'm doing this. And if they have it on mute, they're going to say, what's wrong with this guy? Because what we see is so powerful. So all these aspects of communication that can give you a little bit more of an advantage are critical. For me, in my world where every word matters, when you say every word matters, how you say every word matters, and the outcome could be life or death, we think about these little things. And all of a sudden, these little pieces are giving people an advantage in their life, in their work, and they're finding their conversations are leading to really good outcomes for them, their family, and their business.
So how we say something matters in so much more than what we say. What are some other, I suppose, tips or pieces of advice that you have for doing the how the right way?
For the delivery piece,
Yeah,
is simply asking for feedback. You don't need to hire an executive coach for $500 an hour. That if you talk to your inner circle of friends and family and colleagues, and you're going to ask them this one question. And I want your listeners to actually do this. Say, hey, when the stress is on, when I'm under pressure, how do I communicate with others? What do you hear from me? And I will assure you that every person out there has 1 or 2 people in their world that have been waiting for years for this moment to say, oh, you'd like some feedback in how you are when the pressure's on? Let me share you. And I hope that you've got some time and I hope you've got a notebook because this person is so grateful that you're now in a position that you're willing to hear this. And maybe it's going to reveal some blind spots. And hopefully we do this with the correct mindset that I'm in a place where I'm ready to hear that feedback because it's important that we're in a place that we can hear that and that the person is loving and kind on the other side, that they salt their words a little bit and that they're thoughtful and saying, I'm doing this because I want to get better at this. That's the purpose that I'm asking you. And the only time we get feedback is in these annual performance reviews that we get with our companies that everybody just kind of checks the box and goes through that. But are we willing to ask for feedback? And we get to cheat a little bit in the SWAT world. When I am the negotiator, the primary negotiator on the phone, I got you right across from me. You're my coach. And we're actually sitting face to face and we can see each other. And as I'm negotiating and talking, you can give me those signs. We're going to take it down a little bit. We're going to turn down that volume, slow it down, or slide me a note. Now, I don't know how you do that in business negotiation. It'd be kind of strange if I were on the other side of the table giving you some coaching signals as you're negotiating. You're like, who's that guy? Oh, that's Scott. He's my negotiation coach. Don't worry about him. So we have to practice it. So we have some preparation and we have to get some feedback to how we are when it matters. And then now we're putting this together to say, what adjustments can I make, even if they're small? What adjustments can I make to enhance my delivery? Because our delivery creates the feeling in somebody else. How do they feel when they're experiencing you? What is your person effect? And once we get good at creating that feeling and emotion, that's how we make decisions. Now we're getting that emotional piece in there. Say, hey, I like this. I feel comfortable. I want to do it. Rather than I ran the data and the facts and figures and graphs and charts really have convinced me that this is a good decision. I think that the research is pretty clear. Most of our decisions are based on emotion.
I wonder when you're sharing the story that when you're in actual, conversation with somebody in distress, that you've got somebody right there real time coaching you. I wonder if that sort of relates to the stakes. And so in a business context, the stakes are generally not as high as what you would have been in. So I think that the margin for error is probably greater. And as long as you're consistent with doing some form of a debrief at some point with somebody, if you've got a colleague in the room, I think that might be an opportunity to leverage that coaching, and at least in a somewhat similar manner to what you were able to benefit from?
Yeah, and I would argue though that people say, well, this is life or death in business negotiations. Well, that's different. If you're leading organizations, the decisions you're making impact the lives and well-being of so many people that literally their livelihood and well-being depend on the decisions of the leaders. So let's not dismiss that these business negotiations aren't impactful on ourselves, on our family, and on the people that work within this organization. Because what happens when we make the wrong decision and the business is going down and we need to lay off 200 people that no longer have a job, that can't provide for their family? Now we're spinning them into entire states of crisis. So when we diminish to say that this negotiation isn't that important, this negotiation isn't so critical, the outcome isn't life-changing, treat our important conversations like each one, this connection could be the one that changes my life. This person could bring value to me beyond what I could ever imagine right now. And sometimes that might not be the case, but think of how much more we could create if I show up with everything I have to say, I want this negotiation to go as well as possible to create the most value, the most opportunities, and see what we can create. I like the idea that the best negotiators believe in what is possible. So let's not throw away any opportunity to connect with somebody else and reach good outcomes in our negotiations.
Yeah, no, fair point, Scott. So if I was to paraphrase so far, I think some of the things I've picked up from you would be trying to identify what your main triggers are. I think preparation is key. Leaning in with curiosity and not with judgment. You talk about not asking the why questions that can sort of elicit a defensive response. Something else that you've mentioned a couple of times, though, is how important listening is, to the point that that was a fundamental part of your training, is you would just get together and listen. Can you share some of what really good listening actually looks like?
I think that we can teach you the 8 skills of active listening. And this is what the FBI teaches their negotiators. And this was stolen from crisis counseling before negotiation was a thing. But it's more than just being able to say, these are the skills. And it's more than saying, I can demonstrate what each one is. Because really what we're doing in these active listening, yes, we're listening, but we're also demonstrating to you that I'm listening. But I've noticed that there's kind of 2 groups of people, well, maybe 3 groups. One group that doesn't know how this works and they don't care. But you have 2 groups that can say, well, I know what these skills are. I read them in a book, or I can maybe even demonstrate them. And I watch them work, and I'm not convinced. I just won't believe it. And part of it is they might be new. So they're so busy working on trying to remember, all right, how do I do a proper emotion label? What is my next open-ended question? Oh, I want to try the technique of mirroring or reflecting on this one. Let me try an iMessage on this one. And you can see that they're thinking through that process, and it isn't quite natural. It seems a little bit forced. And then you have the group of people where I'm just kind of nodding along, and I'm like, I would do anything this guy tells me to do. I believe it completely, and I'm totally locked in. And I think part of it is your skill level, because we have to move it from your knowledge to your skill, but then move it to just who you are. Because now it's not a skill of practicing. This is just who I am and how I handle myself and how I interact with others. That is really, really powerful when it's so natural. Now you don't even have to think about it. You're just doing it on autopilot, and I can really manage the delivery, the nonverbals, and really be paying attention to everything about you and all the information I'm receiving from your side. But at its core, the people who are really good at this, I think it's because they care. And it's that simple. Do you care?
Right. And so assuming that we do care about each other, there's 8 components, it sounds like, to active listening. And we don't have to go through all 8 of them, Scott, but I wonder, because I've heard you on other conversations just talk about head nods and using phrases to continue the conversation and whatnot. But I wonder, what are some of the more high level, I suppose, or harder to master listening skills that you think are really effective?
Yeah, I think of the 8 skills, and this isn't classified information. Anybody can pull this. The acronym is MOREPIES, MOREPIES. That kind of helps me organize the 8 skills of active listening. But the three most important, and I've mentioned them earlier, are open-ended questions. And this is not a bias against close-ended questions because we need close-ended questions. I need a yes or no. I need a specific response from time to time. But I've seen that under pressure, when we do these reality situations, these reality-based training scenarios, we default to these close-ended questions. Like we don't have the capacity to be as creative under pressure, which is why that preparation piece is so critical. I've got 12 questions I can ask you in a situation like this that I can throw out there anytime that's going to create dialogue. So if our power in negotiation comes from information and options, and it does, it's more than just tactics at the table. How do I get those pieces of information and options? And it's by asking good questions. But I've also learned, having been a detective for 5.5 years, people do not like to be interrogated. So after about the second or third question, you better be able to mix up your listening skills, because if you go to question number 3 and 4 and 5 without taking a break, instead of bringing that wall down, that wall of reactance goes right up. And now there's a barrier between us, because at some point I'm going to be like, hey, this isn't a real conversation. Are we ready to reciprocate where, all right, now you get to ask me some questions? And a lot of people are like, no, I'm going to ask the questions. It doesn't work like that in the real world. People don't like to be grilled. So let's mix it up a little bit with some emotion labels. So we're not just connecting with the words that they're saying in the content, but we're getting to the emotion behind it. One of the techniques is an I message. And you can maybe use this once or twice at the very most in a negotiation or a difficult conversation. And I feel blank when you blank because blank. So I feel worried when you keep shooting that gun because it's unsafe, it's dangerous. And in a different context, I feel frustrated when you keep yelling because we're not making progress here. And what this is, a properly structured I message, is a nice, polite way of saying, hey, knock it off. And sometimes that can be a little bit rough in a negotiation to say, hey, knock that off. Don't do that, because now we're turning into this a little bit. A nice I message, it's going to test, does this person care enough about how I feel? And it's structured in a way that you actually can't argue with that. I feel worried. Now you have to argue with how I feel. This is actually how I feel. I'm just sharing that with you. Okay. And we're bringing a little bit of accountability to bad behavior is what we're doing. So it's a nice way to kind of maybe bring things back to a nicer place if somebody's getting a little difficult on us.
Okay, really helpful. That is, I love the specificity of that. Now, what happens if you get a signal that the other person doesn't seem to care about how you feel?
Yeah, and that's interesting. What is my purpose of being in this negotiation in the first place? That's my question. To say, this person, I don't care about you. I'm gonna ask them, so what is your goal here? Because there's a reason you're having a conversation with me. If truly you could just go do what you want and get whatever you want, go do it. Why are you talking to me? There's a reason you are talking to me, and I want to know what it is. So I'm going to start getting into this. Okay, there's a reason you're here. I want to know what it is. And I'm curious now, because I don't need you. I'm going to talk over you. I'm going to diminish you and take this. Is this a negotiation tactic where I'm going to come in and try to intimidate you or show you how powerful you are? I'm not impressed. We need to work together to get an outcome that we want. So now when we say, hey, is this a tactic, or do you just not have self-control? What brings you to this conversation? Truly, why are you here then?
And you would just ask that. And you would just ask that point blank, like, what are you here for? What do you want from this conversation? Like, you would just come out and bluntly just ask something like that?
Sure. If they're going to be, if it really gets to the point where it is disrespectful or it becomes a power play. So what brings you to this conversation here? And pause. We feel the need to somehow try to level ourselves up by, well, I'm talking more and I'm going faster and I'm sneaking in for space. I'm okay in sitting in silence. what are your goals here today? What are you looking to do with me, my company, my team this side? What keeps you in this conversation? And there's a reason for that. And I want to know what it is.
When you couple that with the pause, I can feel how effective that would be, Scott. Like, you're really getting to some really good stuff here, some really deep stuff. Thank you. And this might be, at the risk of this being repetitive, when I'm thinking about how difficult these skills can be to sort of get a good grasp on, and again, come back to the answer that you said earlier, was that you still are trying to get better at this every single day, and you've been doing this for 15 years, or no, 17 years. Yeah. You've been doing this for 17 years, and you're still trying to get better at it. And I'm thinking of a situation where it would be great if we could have these conversations with lots of preparation, and we're well rested, and they're happening at the time of the day when we're alert and we're our best selves. But so often these conversations happen when we're distressed ourselves and our energy reserves are low. Is there any advice that you have for people where there may not be an option to defer the conversation?
Yeah, and I would say, can you really do that? Do you have the opportunity to set the proper time? And in most cases, the answer is yes, you do. That we want to get it done, we want to check it off our list, but there's power in the process. And if I don't have to do it right now, why don't I use my timing as my strategy piece to say, I want to get the very best outcome? And I think it's okay to say, hey, Jeff, this is an important conversation for me. And I don't know that I'm in the best place to have this with you right now. And because I respect you and I know that there's consequences tied to this, might we be able to do this another time? And it's really tough to say no to that one, to say, well, it's not that important, or what can we do right now? And I just had that within the last week. I got some news that a conference I was scheduled to speak at, and this was an international one, was going to cancel. And they were starting to sit down to explore options with me. And I said, you know what? I think that it might be best if we have this conversation on Tuesday, because it's important for you to get the right speakers and the right event. And I know you're coming up with alternatives right now. But I'm hearing some news that I really didn't want to hear, largely because I declined 3 other speaking events to come to your event, which now is not going to happen, which means we're not getting paid, and all the downstream conversations that go with that. To say, hey, can we come back to this on another day where we might be in a better place? And the answer was, yeah, sure, we can do that. And I think more times than not, the answer is yes, we can set that aside for another time. But if we have to get into it, I think that we just go back to our principles. Am I able to manage myself? And what do I need to do that? And be really clear, what is the goal of this conversation? To be very specific. If the goal is to do this, let's stay very focused on this, because I don't have much time, much energy to let's stay right on task. What do we need to accomplish here? And I think that in every negotiation conversation, that should be right at the top of your page. What needs to be accomplished here? What is my goal?
Yeah, good. And thanks for sharing your personal example there too. And I'm sorry that happened to you, but I think it's really neat to hear how this shows up in your own life. I mean, I think that's super helpful to hear that story. And then again, coming back to the preparation piece and this, I like to call it priming, but what's the goal of the conversation? And if I could add something to that, Scott, because I've started to do this myself, is the goal, but then how do I want to show up in this conversation? And I have found that that's actually been really helpful for me personally. It's like if the feedback I would have for myself is if I could just eliminate defensiveness from my repertoire, I would be so much better, I think, as a friend and a partner and a colleague. And so I've actually been intentionally trying to work on that. So that's really good advice. Something else that happens in the workplace, I think, a lot. It would be so wonderful if people in positions of power were running around the workplace and asking some of the great questions that you've shared with us today to elicit some feedback, right? And ask, how do I show up under pressure and all that kind of stuff, and how do I behave under stress? The reality is, I think that's probably more rare than it is the norm. What are some ways that employees can perhaps start to manage upwards a little bit?
Yeah. How do we lead up? I mean, how many people out there have had a bad boss? All of us, right? All of us. And sometimes that can be a blessing in disguise because that can move you on when maybe you don't need to be in that spot or whatever. But we've all had that opportunity where we've worked for somebody who we've been unimpressed with for whatever that is. So why not demonstrate the skills that I'm looking to see from them? And at the risk of being damaging to your career, I don't know that it's wise to go into the boss's office and say, hey, I just want to share some feedback for you on how you communicate and connect and influence. I don't know that you're going to have a lot of success there because you're not in a place to give that. But if we can demonstrate that in all of our conversations, not just with them, but with others, and show that my success is your success, that it's not me against you. Because the problem is once you get good at this, you become a threat to your boss and they can see it clearly that this person's on the rise. And that's great that they're the future of this company, but I'm not ready to go yet. And I don't want them to take my spot. This could be a problem. So how do we hammer them down? But to say we share a mutual goal here, that the more successful I can be, the more successful you're going to be. And maybe if we don't make it about them, we make it about me to say, hey, I feel like I'm doing a good job, but if I could have this one adjustment to help me do better for us, would you be willing to have that conversation with me?
Scott, I've heard you say that you've made a habit of doing things that scare you. Can you elaborate on why that's part of your DNA?
Yeah, I don't really know that it is. I think that has become, I think I'm probably much more risk averse now. But when you live this life where you're on the SWAT team or in law enforcement, even broadly, I think that you become an adrenaline junkie. And certainly I can't think of a SWAT team call out where I just kind of hit the snooze button. I was like, I'll get to that. And where not like immediately you're wide awake. Wow, I haven't slept in 24 hours, but guess what? I am here. This is big. So you need to, I don't know. I think it becomes conditioned after a while that for me, and I think that's what drew me to speaking on big stages, that everybody says, well, don't you have anxiety with public speaking? I was like, for sure, there's a little bit of adrenaline dump that goes with that, but maybe that's the piece that I miss from my former line of work. Now that I'm retired out of that as a professional speaker and corporate trainer, there's not a whole lot of risk involved, but a little bit of adrenaline when you're on stage in front of hundreds or 1,000 people or bigger to say, okay, I like that feeling here. So why not be willing to be willing to fail?
You have spent a lot of time in places that seeing human beings under duress and in conditions that most of us will never see in our lifetime, other than maybe on the silver screen. How has all of this time spent seeing people in tough situations informed your perspective on humanity?
Yeah, I think that I'm very aware that a lot of us are in pain, and it's not there's that small group out there. It's all of us to say we are all suffering from something: stress, anxiety, grief, loss, trauma, especially in the last couple of years, that this isn't reserved for just them, that it's all of us. And to say that we're all flawed, we're all imperfect, that it's completely normal and natural to go through difficult times and be able to work through that, to have that awareness that there is no perfect life. If we watch social media and Instagram, everybody's amazing, perfect, they're living a normal life. Something's wrong with me that I don't feel that all the time. That's nonsense. We all go through that, and that's normal and natural. So you have to have compassion for people and know that we're all working through our things, and that there's a lot that we don't know about each other.
As you were going through your response to that question, I can't help but think if we could just lead with more compassion, that all of these hard conversations will just sort of naturally go better. And then if we can start using some of the other tactics and the tips that you shared in this conversation, I think there's hope, Scott. So I want to thank you so much for being here today and just for sharing so much about your personal life and your own experiences and all of the phenomenal insights that you have around navigating hard conversations and bringing people together. It's just been wonderful to spend this time with you. So thank you.
And thanks for creating such a comfortable space to share this. I think you would be a fabulous hostage and crisis negotiator, and you'll be getting a call when I start my own team one day.
Let's hope I never get called into action, but it sure sounds good in theory. I'll take the business card without having to go through the actual experience of it. Scott, where do you prefer that people track you down on the internet?
Yeah, I'd love to connect with people personally. I'm on LinkedIn, very active on that social media platform. I manage my own account. So if you want to connect, send me a note, and would love to say hello. You can find my speaking website at scotttillema.com. My business website is negotiationscollective.com. The corporate training around conflict resolution and negotiation. We've got a lot of experts that would love to bring some of that value to your listeners.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you so much, Scott. And there were so many things that were right about this conversation, but I want to remind listeners to enter more conversations asking themselves, what if I am wrong? So thank you so much, Scott, and I can't wait to chat with you again.
All right, take care. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever your favorite podcasts are found. And if you're part of a leadership team and you just know that your organization is capable of even better performance, please reach out to us at unleashresults.com for a conversation and to learn more about how we might help unleash the potential of your team and organization.